Morning. Good morning, everyone. It has been a minute since I have done a live, and I am excited to do this one because for the past week I have been really reflecting on the charts that I have seen from clients, the messages that have come up as a result of doing those charts, and synthesizing the work I've done for years in the realm of fitness, nutrition, and health, with also the work that I'm now doing publicly with human design charting, astrology charting, things of that nature. Analyzing them, putting them together, seeing the overlap, and understanding why it is that certain people have certain patterns. And something I saw a lot over the past few years in doing this work in fitness is I have these pools of clients. I have the clients that pick up their start bundles, start on their program, crush the program, complete it, make the changes they need to make, see the success, progress, change, grow. And it's almost effortless. It's like they just do it. They decide they're going to do it and they just do it. Then I have clients that don't. For whatever reason, they are excited to get started, they have the best intentions to get started, and then they hit a wall. And I'll talk to them. Sometimes I don't talk to them because they don't let me know they're hitting the wall. But the ones that do come to me will try and figure out, okay, what is going on that's preventing this person from having the same experience as this other person who is able to get up and go and rock and roll, right? And I've known there was energetic reasons for why people limit themselves in breaking out of certain patterns. But now understanding that not only were those assumptions I had or those beliefs I had true, but they could also be seen in someone's chart. Those patterns can be seen in someone's chart. So just by looking at your chart, I can tell you you are more than likely going to suffer from lack of will to be able to commit to something and complete it, or you're going to be very sensitive to the feeling of lack in nourishment, in money, in anything. So you're going to want to hoard, and you're probably going to overeat. I can see those things now. There's literal channels and gates in your chart that show you when you are more predisposed to those behaviors. And so I wanted to talk about the three main energy protection reasons that we retain weight, and how I put the first two together, and then the third one came to me by way of studying human design. The first two I had already figured out by observation and by being in relationship to people who had body image issues like myself, who struggled with weight loss, who struggled to stay on a plan, who just couldn't seem to get it together. Okay, so if you happen to be watching live, please say hi so I can say hi to you. And if you're watching the replay, and you have any questions or comments, let me know below. So the first one the first way I really began to pay attention to the fact that that weight retention probably had a lot to do with energy and the way we process energy was paying attention to the psychics in my communities. So I have been in the psychic world for a long time. I have the pleasure of knowing some of the most amazing psychics ever and to have worked with them directly. And one thing I noticed is that regardless of the city that I was in and regardless of the communities that I was in, most of the psychics I knew were really large, physically large bodied, carrying a lot of adipose tissue, a lot of fat. And I was like, I wonder why that is, why that seems to be a certain type of body that I encounter in people who are prolific psychics, people who do a lot of this work. And the more I sat with that and paid attention to that, I realized that there is this thing about carrying mass with you, physical mass, that helps you process energy differently. It almost slows down the speed of energy at which we receive information, okay? And it speeds down sensitivity. So if you have this physical protection barrier around you, chances are you're not going to be as heavily impacted or as quickly impacted when you're processing a lot of psychic energy. And I was like, that makes sense, because these people do this day in and day out, countless hours a day. It makes sense that they would be creating a physical manifestation of protection to handle the amount of processing that they're doing. That made sense to me. And then my search continued, and I started to pay attention a lot to people who had trauma in their youth, particularly when they were young. And even now, as I'm revisiting human trafficking and I'm doing a lot of research and listening to a lot of survivor stories about that, I realize there's also a correlation between women, I'm going to say women because that's the most time I've spent is with that population, who were sexually abused as children or as youths, and how they carry fat later in their life. And I said, okay, here is another clear connection between body image, weight retention, and trauma. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I know that it exists. I know that women who were violated at very young ages in their life have a tendency to shield themselves in these layers of excess weight as a method of protection. And now I know, looking into people's charts and looking at certain channels in people's charts, that the very same channels around digestion are also around sexuality. Food and sexuality share channels on the human design chart. So when there's interruption in those channels for whatever reason, there will be an interruption in food management, and food processing as well. And so that something pinged for me when I saw that on a chart. I said, oh shit, like I knew that, but now I see that, because I can see how those very same channels are connected to both of those life cycles, meaning the sexual cycle and the digestive cycle of the human body. So if there is anything that goes wrong in that sexual cycle, it will affect the way that you process food, take in food, manage food, whatever. Yes, Leah, yes. Many women know this intuitively, and this is something I put together just between my own story and looking at other people's stories. But now seeing it in a chart, that really blew open my entire understanding of how profoundly woven together we are as human beings, and how holistic we are. So if we're not handling really that original interruption in those channels, taking a handle of your food and weight loss is not going to be as simple, okay? And this is amplified when you're someone who has what we call an open will center in your chart. If you have an open will center, which means you already don't have consistent access to willpower, you're only going to find it harder to stick to something, do something, be consistent with something, okay? So there's a lot of parts of the chart that matter and can be read in synthesis, but I'm just trying to illuminate certain things that maybe you've not thought about or not looked into that could benefit you. So it doesn't only have to be sexual trauma, it could be sexual imbalance. So let's say for whatever reason you have no drive, no libido, or maybe hyperdrive, hyper libido, which in my opinion also stems from trauma most of the time, but maybe not. Maybe it's a hormonal imbalance, or maybe whatever. You will still see this upset in food regulation, even if it's not necessarily trauma-based, but it's just imbalance-based for whatever reason, because they share the same channels. So I put that one together myself years ago, and then recently figured out that there was an actual thing that could show me if that was a potential in someone's chart. Oh my gosh, this is yelling at me. That's my headset. Sorry, guys. It's super loud. Oh, God. All right. So the next one that I had put together was when I was really paying attention to addiction. And I got interested in looking at addiction years and years and years ago when I first became a minister and when I was doing ministerial counseling, spiritual based counseling, very young. I got very fascinated by the concept of addiction, and I felt that addiction was the hunt for an experience. It wasn't about the substance, whether it was an opiate or, an upper, a downer, food, sex, stimulation, whatever the addiction was, it doesn't really matter. That I figured out that addictions don't necessarily really have consequence in what type of addiction it is. Simply the fact that a person is addicted to something and continues to seek for that thing is really important information. And I put together at that very early time in my life that it was more likely than not a separation from God or a separation from source, feeling apart from the all that is. So we use our substances in whatever capacity that is to feel this sense of fulfillment, this sense of belonging, this sense of peace, this sense of everything that feeling connection to source would give us. Addictions give momentarily. There's a momentary gap filling that happens with addiction. And I was like, I would be willing to put everything I own on the line for the fact that that really is the source of addiction. And if we're not handling that, we can't handle addiction. We just can't. It's not okay to just substitute one thing for the other or just talk about it we really have to get down to not trusting source, not trusting our connection to the all that is. That almost inevitably leads people to addiction, and trauma is the gateway for that. So when you have trauma that's very significant, it creates an automatic distrust, okay? A distrust in source, a distrust in order, a distrust in safety. So that leads you to the path of addiction, but that's not the reason for the addiction, if that makes sense. It's just the gate. It's just the door in which you enter through, okay? That now, revisiting this, there's also a gate and a channel in human design for that. And it's actually an abundance channel. It's a lower channel in the lower centers, or it also corresponds with chakras. And there is a gate for that. So again, everybody has these gates and channels. Some people have it colored in or defined and some people don't. So it affects differently. But when you have this defined, you are more likely to be sensitive to this kind of trauma or this kind of over awareness. So it's interesting that you say that, Eileen, that it's in the sacral, because in human design, this particular channel that I'm talking about is in the lower parts of the center of a chart. So you would see it between the sacral and the root design, the root centers. Okay, that's where this channel is that I'm talking about, okay, connecting the sacral and the root. Now, again, it is an abundance channel. So the shadow side is addiction and feeling disconnected, not trusting source, being also obsessive or hoarding or oversensitive to not having enough. But then the light side of that is trust, abundance, having enough, things of that nature, pleasure. That's the light side of that, okay? So again, something that I had understood from a while ago, but now you can see it in a chart. And now when I see that channel in someone's chart, I can say, okay, has this ever been a problem in your life, or is this an active situation? A lot of my clients that I've been seeing, I know well. So I know those parts of their story. So when I see it in their chart, I'm not surprised. But if it was someone I had never seen before, just by seeing that, I would know that there would be a question for me to ask them about this kind of behavior. Hi. All right. So the final one, that this one was not one that I necessarily came up with years ago. This third one came into my consciousness from doing human design work, from reading people's charts, from learning more about the centers and how the centers operate. And this one is weight retention via energy protection due to lack of rest. Okay, so this is what we would call the burnout channel. There are burnout channels on your chart. And if you have them accented or colored in, chances are you have a propensity for burnout. And I have that. I definitely have that channel. I have a propensity for burnout. So when you have that illuminated, I should say, or defined, colored in, even if it's just half colored in, because in human design, you can have a full channel or you can have what's called a hanging gate. So it's like half colored in. When you have that, you have a propensity for burnout. And that's important to then look at a person's type and strategy too, right? So for example, myself, I'm a projector. I don't have a motor. So I am not designed to generate my own energy consistently. If you were a generator or a manifesting generator, you do have motors. So you can handle more consistent energy a lot better. You can generate it a lot more than someone like myself, right? So not only do I happen to be a projector who doesn't have access to consistent energy, I also now have this burnout channel defined. So I did not know any of this until a few years ago about myself. But I will tell you that I have this tendency to not know when enough is enough when it comes to working or activity. So I naturally know when to stop when I burn the F out. Like I get sick, I get injured, something goes horribly wrong, and I never understood why it was that I couldn't moderate myself. Like, why do I always end up in like a trash heap versus just being able to say, maybe I should take a break. Maybe I should chill out. Maybe I should take rest, right? But with this knowledge coming in and looking at my chart, I'm like, oh my God, this is why. Because my type already struggles to know when enough is enough. And on top of that, I have this burnout channel. So I really struggle to understand regulating energy and knowing when I need rest. Okay. That's important because not receiving enough rest can lead you also to having excess weight gain, weight retention, just because you're almost, again, that same burnout channel around the digestive as well. You tend to, if something goes wrong here, it's going to reflect here. Okay, so the same thing as I was talking about with the first point that I made. So these three things that are, sexual trauma or sexual imbalance, God trauma is what I called it, or feeling distrust in source in our place of belonging, and also not knowing how to rest and not knowing when to rest. Those three things really affect the energetic component of retaining weight and feeling ease in our bodies. So if you feel, like I tell my clients, if you feel like you're doing all the right things and something still isn't budging, of course there's other things to look at. How are your hormones? How is your thyroid? But if you check the boxes of physical things and something isn't budging, then it's time for you to pay attention to the energetic components of what's going on in your world. And for that reason, I'm really grateful for something like human design, because it really helps me to understand people's bodies on an energetic imprinted way, which is different than astrology, because I feel like astrology is definitely more about archetypes and the relationship of archetypes, and can totally tell you about life patterns, by the way, can totally tell you about tendencies and things of that nature. But I think because my background is in body work and yoga and those things, the human design appeals to me so much because it's in the body. I'm looking at these channels, these gates, these relationships of the body using body language. And that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me, just knowing what I have figured out intuitively in my world of work as a therapist, and now being able to look at people's energy imprints and say, this is here, and this is something that you should take a look at specifically. Yes, projector problems. Yeah, it's tough when you're that design because you just don't know. You tend to overdo it. Rest is so important. So if you're a non-energy type, again, if you don't know anything about human design, I mean, you can look that up. You can get a free chart online as well. But if you want a chart analysis done, you can also, I shared a link up there, go to my site and schedule one. If you're a non-energy type, meaning you don't have that sacral, so you're either going to be manifestor, projector, reflector. Non-energy types, non-generating types, don't have that go, 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 go constant access to energy. If you're a generator, a manifesting generator, you do. That's the majority of the population. So majority of the population, we're meant to work the 9 to 5, do the work, do the thing, keep going. But for those of us who are non-energy types, I feel like this is an even bigger issue because first of all, we don't burn the same way. Our metabolism isn't the same way. We don't digest the same way. And then we have this struggle with knowing when to rest, like when to show up, when to rest, the balance of that. There are so many HD reads that you can do. It's like, I would say choose intuitively because there's really so much information. And I have read, I don't know, a million things in the past 2-3 years. And my real understanding of human design came from actually doing it, from like looking through it and, interpreting and looking at my own chart and living in my design and testing my design. And that's really where I got a lot of that more in-depth knowledge. But when it comes to learning, get a reading would be my first one. Understand how to live your design so that you can practice this and know what it means. And then number 2, use your intuition when it comes to like listening to people or following people. That's true for everything, but definitely for that. All right. So if you have any questions or comments about this, please let me know. Please feel free to share this video. It is public. And I'll be uploading it to other channels as well so that everybody can have access to it. I think this is really important insight for anybody that is just struggling to put these pieces together. And this is just one thing that you can look at when you look at someone's chart. There's so much like life purpose, what you were designed to do, what you're more inclined to do, how you recharge, what kind of partnerships are best for you. All of those things are in there. And for me, it's the strategy to win at life. That's how I feel about it. And every time I do someone's chart and I hand it over to them, because I send them a recording of our time together, I also send them PDFs. Like my last one was 15 pages worth of a PDF. It's like you have so much information that you can go over forever about who you are and how you function best in the world, so that whenever you're in that place of like, well, I don't know what to do next, or I don't know what's mine to do, you'll have that information. So you will know where to look next and how to respond to the opportunities around you. Every type responds completely differently to the opportunities that are presented to them. And if you don't know how to respond to that, then you end up living out of design. And life feels very hard when you're living out of design. Exercise feels hard. Weight loss feels hard. Relationships feel hard. Everything feels hard. Business when you're living out of design. So to me, this is like mind-blowing. So good. All right, everyone, have an amazing one. And I can't wait to work with some of you and answer any questions that you might have. Bye.